This episode, we have Zain Lakhani joining us, and he's the founder of Lightci. The cool thing about being a founder is you get to do things your own way, as we know. And the recruiting industry is sort of set in its ways, usually about how it does things. And even in the startup world, when you launch, you generally do things with the boilerplate way whenever possible to reduce the amount of time it takes to launch and get things done. Sometimes doing things the way things have always been done actually never finishes the job. And that's one thing that Zain himself and Lightci have entirely made sure never to do. See, they don't rely on the old, let's put some job postings out and get things done. No, Zain relies on the network effect. Him and his team are all about reputation, who we know, and who can get the job done. And that's how they get the job done. When you're set on changing the way an industry does things, you're going to get a couple of haters, but also a lot of people who love what you do. And Lightci definitely had some of that experience. And Zain goes into detail on how it is he managed that as he continued to move forward regardless. This is a story of bootstrapping, innovation, and the power of relying on people, especially as a leader. And now, Zain Lakhani of Lightci. Man, it is my pleasure to have Zain here with us. Zain, how you feeling today? And thank you so much for stopping by.
Not bad. I'm feeling okay. Busy week, but all good things for now.
Yeah, man, it's the tech startup world. It's never ending, man. When I was looking at some of the stuff online for like Lightci, and I saw that you had a partnership with Google. I was, in particular for like placement of like world-class talent, 19 engineers to be exact. I figured that was like the best place to start. How did that collaboration even happen?
Yeah, so it was actually a strange progression. So I started Lightci with a buddy of mine, David, and it kind of started off as basically just a one or two man consulting gig. Like we would go into these companies, build products, kind of cross our fingers that their internal teams could take over and hope for the best. And then I had a friend of mine at Google who said, "Hey, like, do you want to take a shot at building your own team?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "How do you want us to pay you for it?" And I was like, "I can get paid for this kind of stuff? No way." That's awesome. So then it kind of morphed into less consulting work, more recruiting work with a consulting focus, if that makes sense, right? So we build high quality products with high quality teams because they kind of go one and one together, right? So you need a good team to deliver on a good product to have good results in market. So it's just a natural fit.
Yeah, no, I mean, talk about kismet, right? It just kind of just happened and you scaled that all the way to the fullest, man. So then would it make sense to ask, because there's a peculiar way that you decided to set things up as you move things forward. And that was that you don't rely on actual job postings as part of like the way to find talent. If I understood the notes that I had here correctly, you actually focus on networking particularly, and that action has shaped the company's success in some way. What was the genesis of that thinking?
Yeah, so like it came down to the network of trust, right? Think about it like this: when you go grocery shopping and you're looking to buy some new frozen food, for example, the one you're likely to pick is one someone has given you a recommendation on. Same thing when you go to restaurants or go out for drinks. Like you'll go to a bar that a friend has told you about, or a restaurant that a friend has told you about, because they put that stamp of trust on the product or service. The same thing applies to engineers, right? When you hire one engineer, the goal is to hire all five of their friends as well, because you have that existing work chemistry. You know they're technically pre-vetted because you've worked together. And worst come to worst, if something goes wrong, they put their stamp of trust on it, right? So it holds everyone more accountable inside of that engineering network and scales a lot faster too. When you go outbound on LinkedIn, right, like a lot of recruiters will kind of just take a job posting, paste it into an email and say, "Hey, like this is what we're looking for. This is the salary range. Let us know what you want to do." But when you go outbound from like an engineering perspective, it's more, "Hey man, like I'm working on XYZ project. This is why it's cool technically. Can you help?" So it's a little bit different, right? It's more like, "Come work with me as a friend. Like I'm working on this cool stuff. I am a talented engineer, so you have the opportunity to work with me, whoever is going outbound." And it makes it easier to get in front of like higher quality talent in general.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of, I mean, the network effect is real. It's just really cool to see you step in that direction of like, this is the business model. Because as a business model, that's a really peculiar way of doing it, right? Because most people think, oh yeah, you can scale it with job placements. But you're right, you
Right.
can just as easily scale it with networks and in particular control the quality. Is it an application that people can go to? This is what I'm curious about because I didn't get the chance to actually log in and see what that looks like, but I'm curious about that.
No, not at all. So it's the way I would describe it is it's a fully people-driven business. So fully relying on the networks and the engineers themselves. We don't put up job posts. We don't expect inbound like pipeline or funnel, because if there is, like, the barrier to entry is very low, right? Like, you look at all of these open recruiting marketplaces where companies can post anything and candidates can enroll without any pre-technical vetting or anything like that, and it just creates a lot of noise, right? Like, you're in the same spot you were before you hired a recruiting firm, where you're posting something on LinkedIn and you get 1,000 applicants. Now you have to wade through each one of them and say, hey, like, is this a fit for my job? Is this a fit for my job? And then maybe you miss out on some diamonds in the rough, or maybe you pass people on that shouldn't have been passed on. So it becomes very tough. Like, if you turn this into a two-sided marketplace, like, how do you control quality from both sides, not just the candidate side, but the company side too, right? You don't want to send your engineering friends to work for a company that you wouldn't work for yourself either, right? So, like, we vet from the client side and we vet from the candidate side.
That is such an important point. So many people in the marketplace only look at it one-sided, and you're 100% right. Part of the power of that network effect is that you can also tell people which companies are actually worth working at or which ones haven't figured it out yet, so they're not the best workplace, I think is a nicer way of saying
Yeah.
that.
And it comes across as backwards to a lot of people. It's like, well, you're actively turning down revenue. I mean, sort of. But in the long run, if you dilute your company, your client pool, you're right back where you started, right? Like, you become one of those big recruiting firms that people kind of look at their website and go, okay, this looks like another generic placement service. Like, what's really the reason from switching from an existing provider, right? And then the pipeline starts to break down on both sides. So, like, humans at their core is like what our business is centered around, right? Like, it's the emotional intelligence and, even the intellect quotient to a lesser extent that we've kind of built this model around, right? From both sides. You want to make sure that the engineers have high EQ and that the clients have high EQ so that there's a good match in between, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, man. I think it's one of the fundamental. I mean, look, the good news is you're on a show that is talking to startups specifically about things that matter to them. And nowhere is it more expensive than in the area of hiring, training, losing. There's attrition, right? It's like the most expensive thing. So quality control and working with a partner that actually cares about quality is everything. I myself ran into a stint where I helped someone hire some people for a marketing agency. And I remember going through like 14 pages on LinkedIn for like maybe 5 people. And I said, I can't believe people do this full time. Like there's like so many interviews and follow-ups, and you want to make sure you're
Right.
not mean to people. And I myself have worked with recruiters where we'll jump on, we'll talk, and then they disappear, or vice versa.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure. How do you control for all that when it's so people centered? And what kind of startups would you like to see reaching out to you as they're listening to this that you can help them?
Yeah. So, like, the biggest demand from startups more often than not is culture fit, right? And screening for culture fit is very, very difficult. Like, you don't truly know someone is a culture fit until they get there. But the way that we do it is slightly unique in the sense that we screen people as if we're hiring them internally for our own company. And in a lot of cases, that is what we're doing. They're contracted out to a company, but they're full-time employees of Lightci. So it becomes, how do we copy paste that process and tinker it slightly for whichever company comes to the door, right? So I'll give you an example. We signed a startup a couple of days back, and we asked them, hey, what's most important? Is it cost? Is it quality? Is it culture fit? Like, where on the spectrum do you sit? Obviously, they said all of them are important, which makes our job a little bit harder. But we sat down with their VP of Eng and we said, hey, like, give us an idea of what it's like a day in the Eng chair. Something that we can go back to these candidates and pitch, and see if they're actually interested in it, right? Because we delicately put, like, we want to screen for a little bit of BS on both sides too. We want to make sure nothing makes it past, like, quote unquote, the Lightci filter. And the best way to do that is by hearing from these VPs directly. Like, tell us what your culture is like, what you want to see, what you don't want to see. We're going to adjust our interview process to be overfit to what you're looking for, right? Both from a technical perspective and, more importantly, a cultural perspective. You don't get that with a lot of recruiters. A lot of recruiters will go on LinkedIn, like, do a Boolean search and then spray and pray and hope for the best. And that's how you end up being, like, right in the same spot. Why not just do that yourself, right? You don't really need a recruiting firm for it. And I don't mean to come on the show and just totally shit talk all of the recruiting agencies out there. External recruiters are a big part of the ecosystem, right? But the ecosystem is starting to become fragmented at the edges. And like all these new founders that are running startups for the first time, they're going straight to the people that are inside their InMail or inside their cold outbound funnel that are saying, hey, like we have recruiting services, we're cheap, use us. Okay, great. What happens when you fire that person in 100 days because they're not working out? You're not going to get a refund. You got to find a new recruiting shop. The relationship is a little more fragmented. You're right back where you started, if not worse.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely people who want to cut costs anywhere. And then there are the smart people who are willing to pay the right price to solve this problem forever. Right. And
Right.
those are definitely part of, I imagine, from what I'm hearing, the kind of qualities that you scan for in a client as well. It's like, do you actually want to solve this, or are you just in the process of forever hiring? Right.
Yeah. And like some people drag out the interview process, right? Like it should be a 1 week thing, maybe 2 weeks. It becomes a 3 month thing. Nobody likes that. The candidate doesn't like that. I personally don't like that. The client probably doesn't either. And it's just like when you start to deal with like the internal politics of hiring, it becomes ultimately more complex.
How has the ecosystem responded to the way that you approach this business? Because it's so different from the way they do it. We've clearly established that here. Has anyone reached out to you sort of in any capacity, whether positive or negative, Jedis, Sith Lords,
Yeah, dude, I won't lie. We've had opposition from like both sides.
I can
Like
only imagine.
a lot of the big recruiting firms, they're like, what the hell is this? Like, this makes zero sense. We've done things a certain way for years and years and years that works and we're making money. Like, don't screw with our food,
Yeah.
And then there's some companies that we pitch to that are like, this makes zero sense. Like, we want to do this all internally. Like, we religiously hate external recruiters. This is not any different. I'm like, okay, then you're probably not a fit for the service anyways, right? But it's difficult, especially when you do so much, right? Like we are recruiting, we are product studio, we are consulting. How do you get that across in a 5-minute pitch? It's pretty difficult, right? And especially if they're not familiar with the space, a lot of the times it just whoosh, goes straight over their head.
Now that we've sort of covered a lot of the day-to-day and how the landscape looks for you, what are you most excited about with Lightci right now that you're currently working on that seems to be taking most of your attention? Is it scaling it up and has funding, like even securing funding? I'm so curious about that because sure, it happened and you're like, great, I'll make this happen. Now, was it paying for itself as it was growing, or did you have to go secure money?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough or still lucky enough that the company is bootstrapped. So we were pretty
Yeah.
close to profitable from day one. There were days totally where I would look at our bank account and go like, hey, that number is not trending in the right direction. But over time, like we've course corrected, we've trimmed some fat and now things are in a good place. So, next couple of months is all about scaling the internal team. So like sales, marketing, design, we're launching a new design function and just hired a very talented head of design. But it's a different kind of stress than I'm used to. I've been an engineer for most of my career and I've sat at the top of startups, but not really at the top, right? Like you're hire number one, but you're not a co-founder kind of thing. So this is very different for me. It's like you're now at a point where you got to take your hands out of all the pies, like let some other people take control, run your org in a way that it's meant to be run and not the way that, a founder who wants to keep his eye on everything would run it. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit stress inducing, but it's also quite exciting.
Yeah, would you say the biggest part of the stress is letting go and trusting other people? Because I personally I've never run a company like that. If I've ever worked with people, it's been as contractors, and I gave them exactly what they needed to do. What is that? What is that transition like? Because there might be someone who just started their startup right now and they're still trying to figure that out. And bringing on that first person or that first 5 on the team, that's a big jump psychologically. Wrong, right?
Totally. Yeah. Like the biggest parallel is like maybe you don't want to go to a party, but you want to get invited to a party, right? And it's the same thing with like meetings and context and issues within the company. Like maybe you don't want to attend every marketing meeting, but you want to get invited to every marketing meeting, right? But it's like this dilemma of what is the most useful use of your time as a founder? Is it really being in the weeds and like listening to all the issues and problems that are going on inside the company? Or is it hiring folks that are smarter than you to go out and solve those so it frees up your time to do sales and BD or whatever it might be? Um, I've seen founders go in both directions. Like one of my first startups, the founders wanted to maintain control. Like it was very obvious from day one. Like they kept hiring people, but it's also like a lot of executive overreach. Like would veto decisions left, right, center, and that's good. Like a lot of founders will get to a good place like that because they're probably super smart. They might be visionaries, whatever it might be. But you kind of hit a point of you can't scale past it without handing off some of the work because like I'm one person, right? My calendar only exists from 9 to 9. Like you can't schedule before, you can't schedule after. Like where are you going to find time? I'm going to be the one who's slowing you down now, and that's not a good feeling either, right? So it's this weird balance of I want to be involved with everything, but at the same time, I want people to have autonomy. It's difficult. Like I don't think I've cracked the code yet.
I love how casually 9 to 9 is just like the go for go. Like that's just on my day from 9 to 9. And most people in their life walking around 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, you're like, yeah, look, my calendar is only available from 9 to 9. That's as
Yeah.
much as I'm willing to do.
Oh no, like this morning I had a meeting at like 9:15 and I was like, guys, like what are we doing? Nobody is fully out of bed yet. Like let's give it another hour. This is not going to be productive. And everyone's like, what? We've been up since 7:30. Like we were working out and running. I'm like, no, you weren't. Get out of here.
No, man, it's a different game being in this industry. And you're in a perfect position where you meet a lot of different companies, what they're working on, because you need some of that information to be able to determine your ability to best help them, right? So are
Totally.
there any trends or things that you've seen coming along that because it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't ask someone like you who meets as many people as you do, as many types of companies, especially in the tech world with like all the advancement and technologies that's happening right now from large language models, generative models in particular for like images and videos. Have you stepped into those types of clients and seen some interesting things? Or are there other trends that people really aren't paying attention to that you think, you may want to consider that? And obviously that'll be the benefit of having listened to an interview with you is aside from
Hey,
knowing that there's a kick-ass recruiting company that doesn't do it the old way, and they're actually trying to solve your problem instead of just keep you on a retainer forever and never solve your problem or make matters worse. But you also happen to be filled with insights from just your day to day because you pay attention.
yeah. So I'll say two things. One is that the waves that VCs, startups, private equity, whoever you want to pick out at, that they go through, even though there's hype around different products and stuff, a lot of that still gets sustained even after the hype dies down, right? So like fintech is a great example. Fintech had its moment between 2019 and 2021 where people were raising crazy money at crazy valuations. And now it's the MO is almost, oh my God, like all these folks are going out of business, like they're having down rounds, but not really, right? Like if you look under the covers a little bit after the dust settles, like there are players that remain that are doing really cool shit and not burning money at a crazy rate, right? Like all of these new age startups that are building credit cards or processors, like bank integrations, all that kind of stuff, they're still around. They're chomping, they're doing well, they're growing. They may not be raising money at like the $50 billion mark or anything like that, but they're doing a great job, right? So like it's important to pay attention to things outside of like the status quo when it comes to tech trends. Because right now, like Gen AI is all the hype, but 2 cycles from now, it definitely won't be, right? It'll be something else that picks up the news. And that's the other thing. Like tech is progressing at such a ridiculous trend of like parallel increase. Like you see all of these industries that are growing side by side in like total silos, right? Like look at fintech and then look at Gen AI. Right now, there's virtually no crossover. Like there's companies out there that'll tell you, hey, there is crossover, but those companies are many quarters away from getting anything right, I think. So tech is in a weird spot, like funding wise and ecosystem wise, where money has created odd silos where there shouldn't be silos, both in terms of the type of tech, the type of money, like how much money is being put in. And it would just be cool to see over time that stuff to start to converge almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly, you're right. I can't even think of a company that I've seen take it full advantage of both of those in a way that actually works. so far. I'm sure there's someone out there who's putting that together. You might even know the company, you know?
Right, right.
But with that said, okay, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to answer that. I know I was way out of left field, but I feel like I want to roll out the red carpet for you as we begin to close things out. Like, what do you want people to know about what you're working on now, and where would you like for everyone to get a hold of you, Zain? Like, are you open to LinkedIn? I know we kind of talked about that in passing. Is like, LinkedIn's one option, but if that's not
Right.
really your bag, where would you want people to connect with you?
Yeah, man. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Find my email online. My phone number is in my LinkedIn profile. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, love having conversations with different founders working on different things. Even if it's not a fit from our services, I'm sure we can help you some way, somehow. Like I said, like we have a pretty powerful network outside of just engineers, right? Like we're well connected in the VC system. We can help you raise money. We can help you evaluate options, stuff like that. That's what I'm here for, and that's what the firm is here for. We don't want to paint ourselves in the box of just recruiting or product builds because the network is so much more powerful than that.
Right on, man. Look, I can't thank you enough for taking. I know it's a brief, short conversation, but I feel like we got a lot done in this conversation. We crossed a lot of points off on the list here. Is there anything
Likewise.
else you'd like anyone to know before we roll out?
No, not at all. Thanks so much for the time, Philip.
Yeah, man, my pleasure.